Good evening, everyone. I'm Margaret Andera, Interim Chief Curator and Curator of Contemporary Art at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the first edition of the African American Art Alliance's African American Makers Series, tonight featuring a conversation between Motope Johnson and Willie Cole. This series is sponsored by the Chipstone Foundation and the African American Art Alliance, a Milwaukee Art Museum support group celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. Among their many contributions to the museum, Quad A helped acquire Willie Cole's painting, Domestic Dancers, for the collection. Many thanks to both of our sponsors. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to say a word about the format for tonight's event. Willie and Motope will engage in a conversation about Willie's career, guided by certain bodies of work. After they finish, there will be time for questions from you, the audience, and you can submit a question at any time during the program via the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Once their conversation is concluded, I will ask them questions from those that have been submitted. And now I have the pleasure to introduce our two guest speakers. First, Motope Johnson. Motope Johnson is a Milwaukee-based visual artist whose work is best known for themes directly related to African-American history and its influence on popular culture. His work incorporates figurative subjects that are boldly articulated in blue cast, an overt form of counter-narrative that resists the racist tropes waged against African Americans and other people of color. What these works have in common is the artist's fascination with how the indigo blue pigment connects centuries of symbolic meaning. These works are reminiscent of the bygone 19th century social realism tradition, in which art became a type of visual code recognized within the African American visual arts vernacular. Johnson earned his MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Peck School of the Arts and a BFA from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. His work has been included in exhibitions at the Overture Center Fine Arts Gallery in Madison, Wisconsin, the Chipstone Foundation's Dave the Potter Project Gallery at the Milwaukee Art Museum, the Charles Allis Fine Arts Museum in Milwaukee, the Charles A. Worcester Museum of Fine Arts in Racine, Wisconsin, Northern Kentucky's University Fine Arts Gallery in Highland Heights, Kentucky, Juxtaposition Gallery in Minneapolis, and Susan Woodson's Gallery in Chicago. He is currently on faculty in the Arts and Communications Department at UW-Whitewater. Willie Cole is the world-renowned sculptor, printmaker, and conceptual artist, best known for his transformative assemblages of household objects, such as steam irons, shoes, and hair dryers. Cole describes himself as a perceptual engineer, taking everyday objects and through repetition, creating new ways to see old things, which take the form of his visually stunning three-dimensional sculptures. His work addresses the complex histories at the intersection of African-American experience, consumer culture, domestic labor, and the rituals of bodily transformation. Cole studied at the Boston University College of Fine Arts, the School of Visual Arts in New York, and the Art Student League of New York. His honors include the David C. Driscoll Prize, the St. Gaudens Fellowship, a Joan Mitchell Foundation grant, and artist residencies at the Studio Museum in Harlem, as well as here in Wisconsin at the John Michael Kohler Arts Center Arts Industry Program in Sheboygan, and most recently this year at Form Design Studio and Lab in Newark, New Jersey. Cole has had solo exhibitions at a variety of museums, including the Montclair Art Museum in Montclair, New Jersey, the Bronx Museum of Arts in New York, the Miami Art Museum, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Fabric Workshop in Philadelphia, and the St. Louis Art Museum, among many others. And in addition to the Milwaukee Art Museum, Cole's work is included in collections of major institutions, including, and this is a long list, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Detroit Institute of Art, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and the British Museum in London, and that's not even the partial list. He lives and works in Mine Hill, New Jersey. So welcome to you both, Matope and Willie.
To be here.
Hello, how's it going, everybody? So I just want to do check a few boxes. I too really want to thank everyone for allowing us to have this opportunity to speak with you, and then to just to do this with Willie Cole and then of course the sponsors. So John Brown of Chipstone, Sandy Robinson of Quad A, Margaret, who you just met, Aaron, who is kind of behind the scenes. And then one of Willie's staffs, Mari, I just want to thank Mari also for connecting us to begin with. So we're going to try and make this kind of a real easy conversation for both Willie and ourselves, so that at least we can articulate the important role that he plays in the art world. And so I think this is probably a good time to dive in. Willie, if you don't mind, you want to say something before we proceed, or how you want to go about it?
Yes, only because you've invited me to say something, I'll definitely say something. I would say thank you. I'm glad to be part of this program, or maybe we should call it this broadcast. Mm-hmm. And glad to meet you, of course.
Yeah.
As well as everyone else involved here. Yes. And I should point out that my favorite part of all these kind of events would be the question and answer period.
Right.
So I look forward to that at the end.
Yeah. So I think that this is no heavy lifting, as I mentioned once before, I think on either of our parts, because what I enjoy is being able to connect with other artists to really get a gist of thought process, sometimes what motivates you, just where your work has evolved from, in addition to how the viewing public can be informed by the work that you make. So in a previous conversation that you and I had, and I was trying to get you to save some of that conversation, because I think we were able to touch upon a lot of things. And one of the things that I think is really important is to talk about some of your work in somewhat of an order that allows us to, be mindful of all of our time. And so I had asked the question, like, what do you want to talk about? And how do you want to go about doing this? And so one of the key things that came up with, I guess, a body of work, as well as some positions that you're taking, was your Black Art Matters. So if you could be so kind to share with us a little bit about the Black Art Matters work and why that's important to you, and what is the takeaway for us?
Well, to me, Black Art Matters is almost, I would call it a confirmation of the importance that people are aware of. So that kind of makes it also a celebration of Black artists. In this era, it has always been the Black artist as the minority player in the game. But aesthetically, we've been very present for many years. I mean, the first great artist to do what would be called Black art would be Pablo Picasso, So I just want to celebrate our presence. I want people to be proud to hear it and to say it. But I also want to celebrate all the other artists too. At some point, I'll redesign this garment to have someone else's iconic symbol on the back besides my own. Mm-hmm. It was kind of fueled by the coronavirus. When the virus hit the world and the museums and the galleries closed down, I felt the need to emphasize the importance of art in general. By the time that George Floyd was murdered, I felt the need to emphasize Black art. And that's how it came about.
Yeah. So now I think for me, when I looked at this work for the first time, I mean, there was a lot more depth to it. I think that it's, of course, you get these parallels that you were able to make. And so, the iconic scorch that you have on the back, how do you feel that actually really bring it together? Because later on, we'll get a chance to see your scorch art and, the depth of how it's evolved. Yeah.
The scorch is kind of like my logo for the past 20 years.
Yeah.
So it kind of identifies me with this this line. Any event that I get ripped off by another company or another artist, you and everyone would know that the ones with the scorch on it are the originals by Willie Cole.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much why the scorch is there, because it is not it's not an original phrase.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hold on to a bit of the identity for as long as I could.
So there's now, of course, these items can be available. They're available at the MAM store, so at the MilwaukeeArtMuseum.org. And I have to say that when I was kind of looking around, my wife and I were really discussing some of this work. And she put your name in Google and boom, it just blew up. And I mean, there were pages and pages of all the merchandise that you have available. And so, yes, I think that, this is a really good representation of how when you finally reach a point in your career that you get a chance to, take some of what you really do and apply it to a number of these items, be able to make it available.
I also have a great awareness that most of my art is above the price that most people that I know can afford.
Yeah.
So this allows people to have a piece of me, a piece of my work in the environment. And the fact that I have text involved with it, it just keeps the message reverberating throughout their household. And I like that. I should also say that part of this is also to raise money for one of my favorite charities, which is an organization in Los Angeles called Wellspring Hope.
Yeah.
And I attended one of their fundraisers in Beverly Hills about 2 years ago and was just so impressed with the support they received from their body, but also their mission. And their mission is to bring fresh water to Niger. Niger is the most drought-stricken place in the world, according to their website. Mm-hmm. And if you go on their site, wellspringhope.org, you will see videos that show how excited people are when they can finally just get clean water.
Yeah.
These women, these children walk for miles just to find clean water. But this organization digs a well right in their village. So they can access water regularly. Now, water is a big part of my work. I do a lot of work with water bottles currently. Yeah. And the themes of nature, earth, wind, air, fire, and water have been with me for a long time. Yeah. So I felt very moved by their efforts and their results. Yeah. So part of this campaign is also to be able to make a regular contribution to that charity.
Yeah, I think that once I did a little bit of investigation, that too kind of helped inform me. So it's not really just, the act of creating these premiums for consumption. It does have that deeper meaning, which is what we were right. looking at. So I don't know if do we have any other images? If not, then we can kind of move on to the next slide, which I think is interesting. So this takes me back a bit.
Me too.
And, yeah. So the very first time I saw this, in the Milwaukee Art Museum, I had to pause for a minute because when I first saw it, the impression, and I want to ask you this the other day when we talked, I want to ask you now, when you first began to kind of even think of the scorch, because I know when I first remember the scorch, is when, either I left the iron on the ironing board too long and walked away from it before they had these automatic shutoffs on the irons. So, so maybe talk to us a little bit about the dancing domestic aspect of things. So the domestic dancers, which this piece is really depicting. When I first saw this piece, it took me a while to actually see the dancers at first because I was so enamored by the scorch. And then it all began to hit me like, oh, okay, I get it. So talk to us a little bit about maybe the first visual epiphany that you had in doing the scorch.
Scorch. Well, man, the Scorch is like a, you know, a 3-part miniseries. But I can talk about it from the beginning and say that it was kind of like a spiritual awakening for me. Mm-hmm. In the same sense, I heard Bob Dylan say that all those songs he wrote in the 60s, they were like divine. They just came through him. He can't take 100% credit for those words, you know. Mm-hmm. And the Scorch was that way for me because I had been working as a painter, mostly an illustrator, a commercial illustrator. And I was also collecting African art. So when I found a discarded iron on the street, right away, I saw it as very similar aesthetically to African art. Mm. That would be the sole plate of the iron, the part that has the steam holes in it, but also the cover, the shiny part and the black handle was all so African to me. But I didn't recognize that immediately. I recognized the mask right away. Mm. But in the process of making sculptures out of the iron, and at that time I was reading a lot of Joseph Campbell, comparative religious studies and mythology. And I was also reading a lot about the Yoruba traditions. I began to ask myself, if I'm saying that the iron has power, what is the evidence of that power? Mm-hmm. And right away, the answer came, the evidence is in the Scorch. Yeah. So I started doing pieces called Presence and Evidence, where I would make a kind of a figurative sculpture out of the iron itself, out of a single iron, by reassembling those pieces once taken apart, and then putting a canvas behind it that was covered with scorches. And that's how it started. Yeah. And this piece, the Laments Dancer, is who I was married to for many years. Mm. This was my first Scorch where I actually used a waffle iron because at that time I was a waffle addict. Right. That's how it came about. Right.
So let's see the next one, because I think that there's a few of these, and this way at least we get a chance to see some close-ups. So tell me so what's your iron collection like? Because I know you have gone down the road where. So I guess I should ask you, how many irons do you actually own? How many do you own?
Well, I've had thousands of irons over the past 30 years, I would say. Yeah. But I kept the ones that, like, I take most of them apart, you know. Yeah. But the ones that I thought were super unique, I have those separate, and I have them, kind of in a display cabinet. And there are probably about 60 of those. Mm-hmm. But the ones that I used for scorching, I saved the bottom part, the sole plate, like a branding iron.
Sure. Yeah.
So if you can imagine a bookshelf and replace all those books with irons slid in sideways. Yeah. I probably have about maybe 200 of those.
Yeah. I knew that you must have quite a few because there was a piece. So let's see the next one, because I think there's a couple. And so as you begin to kind of see the figurative aspects, the other symbolic aspects of it, I noticed that the steam holes, do take on a very different kind of appearance. I mean, even graphically speaking, they also speak to me too. And then later on, we'll get a chance to see that. I'm not sure if it's included in this collection, but the reason why I asked you about the number of irons that you have, because you've even created a series where you actually name the manufacturers, which
right. Well, I see each steam hole pattern like tribal scarification. Yeah. So that's the steam holes are important to me in most of this work. Yeah. It also gives me a chance to draw with two mediums at once. I'm drawing with the existing pattern of the steam hole, mm-hmm. but I'm also drawing with the fire.
Yeah. So the domestic shield, I mean, that's, so did you add on to the ironing board there? Is that what we're seeing? So would you associate that with kind of like the Kenyan shield, so to speak,
Yeah, I would say it more like Zulu.
Yeah, Zulu too, yeah.
Kenya as well. And these are ironing boards that I made.
Yeah. Okay.
as opposed to purchase. So it's really a wooden ironing board with padding and canvas,
Okay. Cool.
but real ironing board legs.
Gotcha. Yeah, because those are definitely recognizable, but they seem to be a little bit more extended. I could certainly see that.
Right. Yeah, these don't fold down.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, there's some practical purposes for it when a inanimate object like that makes it into the gallery. So you want to be able to make it practical for the viewer. I get that too. So
yeah, it also gives you the option of either standing or mounting on the wall.
Right. So the other thing too is that with the figurative. So let's see the next one. And so here is that scarification kind of thing based on some of those steam holes. And now what you've done was kind of superimpose it over your face to make it more related to the scarification.
Steam hole patterns are sandblasted into glass, and the photos behind the glass.
Okay.
I did these at the Pilchuck Glassblowing School in Seattle.
Yeah.
I guess I did it in the 90s, I know for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was me wearing the GE mask on the right and then the GE scarification on the left.
Okay. All right. So let's see the next one. Next slide, please.
And this is all about the this is good to go to the ones you're showing now.
Let's stay here for a minute.
Yeah. So what happened is a writer in the New York Times said that my scorches represented the various skin tones of African people. And I'd never thought about it that way before.
Yeah.
But during this pandemic and during this racial unrest in this country, I began to see myself as Willie the Scorch. I mean, if I was a mafioso hitman, I'd be Willie the Scorch.
Okay, all right.
Willie the Scorch because my skin is dark.
I get that.
So I decided to name each scorch after a victim of police violence in the United States.
Yeah.
And there are over 2,000 since the year 2000.
Yeah.
But I've made 4 of these pieces so far. Each one contains 88 names.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed in some of the earlier pieces, they actually were inverted the other direction, and so I think that this way they do sort of take on those facial shapes.
The presence of a chin.
Right. So yeah, and that's a really, really good way of looking at it. I mean, even to the point where eventually the scarification goes away, but you end up with these silhouettes.
Well, the big difference here is the previous slide showed in the other direction.
Yeah, the other direction.
Slide showed the scorch slide just before that, but it showed scorch on paper.
Right.
So paper is very different than scorch on wood.
Yeah.
On paper, I can't get. On paper, I can easily hold on to the steam hole pattern. Yeah. On wood, it's harder to hold on.
Right.
And that's why those are much more aggressive and less graphic, really, as individual pieces.
Right. Yeah. So there's so Say My Name is synonymous with a number of the victims,
right?
That we want to always have etched in our memory, because it's really at the forefront of discussions today. Black Lives Matter.
And it's an example of why Black art matters too.
Yeah, exactly.
Educational purposes.
Yeah. So for me, it's I get it right away and did from the very beginning. So I think that this is a good way of you're literally leaving some impressions. So I actually saw you doing this in your yard. You actually outside the barn. Where you
I do these with a forge.
Yeah.
But the ones on paper, I do indoors with the stove.
Yeah. So I can imagine the ones on wood. Yeah, you wouldn't want to do those in the house, man. I know that if you got any smoke detectors, you'd be setting up smoke detectors in the house, man.
my house is my studio, so I've actually taken down all the smoke detectors in my house.
Right.
Which is against the town ordinance, I'm sure, but keep fire extinguishers around.
Yeah. So for the most part, you take those plates and put them on open fire, like you have a fire pit, and then you set them on there. And
so they don't get hot enough that way. I actually have a forge with a fan attached to the bottom. So when I turn that fan on, it gives more oxygen to the fire and it gets hotter. And these are like red hot, even pink hot sometimes. I've even lost some of them in the fire. They melt.
Wow. Okay.
Whereas on paper, on the stove, I use the electric stove. And they get hot, but they never turn pink.
Yeah, that's kind of reminiscent, man, the way that it was done old school, man, before, you know, they actually had the electrical wires plugged in. You take it and put it on the fire, and
that's true.
You know, so our ancestors actually would leave it on the fire and take it off as needed and iron clothes that way.
Yeah. And part of motivation or inspiration for that was when I lived in Newark, there was so many homeless people standing around cans of fire.
Yeah.
When I saw that, I said, that's what I can do. I can use a can of fire, just catch a fan to, you know, the whole thing just unfolded.
Right.
So that on the streets.
Okay, let's see the next slide. Okay, now this is one of my favorites right here, man. This is like, okay, I see is that 57 Chevy or is it a Caddy? Or is that...
it's a Caddy. It's a Caddy. You're right. It's 57 Caddy.
Right. Yeah. Made out of bottles. I think when I first saw this, it was parked out. So you had it on the street. Did you get a ticket for this one?
Yeah, it was parked in New York back in April of last year, and I almost got it. Yes.
Yeah.
But these, like I said, I make a lot of things that have to do with the forces of nature. So your water bottles.
Right. So yeah, you have quite a few. Now, if we were to do the math, I know on some of these, I was actually surprised that you know exactly how many bottles you used.
Right.
You know?
I always know when I start.
But,
you know, if you'd asked me that when this piece was first made, I would have been able to tell you exactly.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do that to you. I know you got some that you've narrowed it down to roughly about 30,000 bottles.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because those pieces are definitely easier to count. This is probably, you know, 3,000 to 4,000 bottles, I would say.
Yeah. And so talk to me about the motivation behind the car. What allowed you to be this ambitious? It's enough that you've done, you know, giants and you've done birds, which we'll see some of those things a little bit later on. But, you know, when you start, you know, going this dimensional and this sort of, you know, where did that come from? Why the car?
Well, the car, you know, I had a friend back in the 80s who spoke to me about being conceptual as well as contextual in your art.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I have a water bottle. And same thing with the iron. So what does the water bottle say to me? The water bottle speaks about the oil industry.
Yeah.
It speaks about life. It speaks about the flow. Speaks about spirituality. You know, I mean, the water says all that.
Yeah.
And the bottle too, in so many ways. So once I knew the things that it said in the first glance, I was able to make a leap to a car because a car runs on oil.
Gotcha.
And before there were gas and coal, there were steam powered engines. So that takes me back to the water. And the issue of pollution, the water and the cars both share that issue.
Mm.
So that was how the idea of a car came up. But the need for it was because I was having a show and I wanted something to really blow people's mind.
Yeah.
I could have made a room full of abstract things, but if it's something they can recognize, there's always a different reaction to that. So I decided to make a car.
Yeah. So when you start thinking about you know, the narratives, I would suppose that really doing the sculpture itself is the first thing. That does the narrative always follow, or does it take a prompt to just jump from the thought of what to do next? Because I know you play around a lot.
Right, playing and prompt are very related.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes the enthusiasm will last more than a day, which might make it feel like it was planned or preconceived, but it's always just spontaneous.
Right.
You know, I had offered a show at a place called Grounds for Sculpture, and they have beautiful outdoor areas and beautiful galleries, and I thought I'd be outdoors. And I thought I had a budget. But at the first meeting, I found out I'd be indoors, and there was no budget.
Yeah.
So in that meeting, I was drinking a bottle of water. I was able to squeeze that bottle because it has all these, all these folds in it already, so it can be compressed for the dumpster. And once I did that, I realized that I could make something out of the bottle. It's just like plastic origami.
Yeah.
Well, that night I dreamed about it, and in the dream I saw a chandelier made out of bottles and there was a picture of Buddha in each chandelier. So I made that, and at the same time I was making this car, because after the chandelier is when I said, well, I should make something that people can really relate to. The Buddha chandelier was more for me, and this was more for the public.
Yeah, I know that the way that I've learned that you work is you work in all these what I call creative silos. So let's look at the next one, because I think you did mention the chandelier. Now this is very cool. The very first time I saw the chandelier work, I actually walked into the Chasing Museum in Madison, where now it wasn't quite as elaborate as this, but it did have the single chandelier that was in the ceiling. And I think I did ask you about whether or not you came in and did the installing. Eventually you did just confirm the fact. But when I first walked in, I thought it was the real deal until I looked up and looked a little closer, and I saw that it wasn't glass at all. So I had to I went over to the attendant and asked the attendant, hey, is that Willie Cole's up there? And then they verified that it was. But this is like, you went off. You really.
This is 10,000 bottles.
Yeah.
Each chandelier is 3,000 bottles. So this is 2 rooms that are about 15 by 15.
Yeah.
A 3-foot hallway between the 2 rooms, and a chandelier in each room.
Yeah. Yeah. So the curtains is killing me, man. It's not just the chandelier, the curtains is killing.
Yeah.
The curtains are.
This was in a firehouse.
Yeah.
And I had to change the whole look of the place. I didn't want to, see those walls and all that stuff. So I just changed the whole place around.
Yeah, this is very it's impressive, because at first glance when you look at it, it is very reminiscent of glass, and I think that I even like the tint and the way that it's lit. Some of the other examples I think we've seen where you add color to it, it becomes even more spectacular.
Yes, it has the photographs of the Buddha radiate those colors.
Yeah.
That's where the color comes from.
So let's see the next one. So this is some of the work that I saw you actually working on. So let's talk about each of those. I know that you have a way that you go about making these, and then your community engagement is also associated, especially with the giants in particular.
Right.
But let's talk about that.
I'll start with Dasani.
Yeah.
So there's an agency called New Jersey Clean Communities Council.
Yeah.
Somehow, maybe because I did the Earth Day in New York, I've become like the Earth Day artist. I've been invited to schools, college campuses on Earth Day, and various communities around the country. So Clean Communities Council, they have a day called Beach Day, where they clean up the beaches in New Jersey. And they incorporate the school kids to do that. And they're sponsored by Coca-Cola. So they asked me to participate in their event, and they collected all the water bottles for me. They collected like 20, 30,000 bottles for me. So I actually made a 15-foot bird that was housed inside of New Jersey Atlantic City Convention Center. But my sponsor was Coca-Cola. The bottles they collected were not all Coca-Cola product bottles. They were just, the bottles I like, because they're all similar, just take the label off. But they wanted Coke stuff. So they gave me new Dasani bottles.
Gotcha.
I left the labels on them. You can see on the back.
Yeah, the blue in there. Yeah.
So that's how this little bird is only 6 feet tall, made at the request of Coca-Cola and Dasani. But the main project was a 15-foot bird.
So this is lit from inside. So are you using gels, or does the labels themselves emit this kind of indigo purplish blue?
Yeah, there's a gel. They use the gel in this photo.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much just a skeleton made out of PVC pipes.
Okay.
With the bottles all around it attached to it.
Okay.
Very different than the giant. With the giant is a soft sculpture.
Yeah. So there's no armature within
Right.
that.
No armature. He can be posed anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one you basically so do you use wire in the bird as well? Because I noticed that with
Yeah, I make
giant,
beads. You know, if you have, it's like a necklace, except instead of using beads, I use bottles.
yeah.
Now I lay each strand next to each other, and I weave across the other direction. So now I got a sheet, like a blanket of bottles, and I can just shape that any way I want.
So I want to make sure I'm not telling any trade secrets or anything like that. I actually heard you repeat that before, so I want to make sure that for the record that
I don't mind.
I'm not giving away any trade secrets or anything.
No, not yet.
Yeah. So with the giant though, so tell me this what is that about 18 feet, 20 feet? You know,
Yeah, this
from
giant here is 25 feet tall.
Yeah.
And he's about 30,000 bottles.
Yeah.
Because each limb is made separately. So from the knee to the ankle, from the knee to the thigh, and torso. So it's almost made like a doll.
Yeah, right.
With articulating parts. But
Sure.
they're all made as sleeves and
So,
then they're stuffed.
And so how many of these guys have you made? Because I think that you did indicate that the popularity of the giants have kind of picked up.
Yeah. No, I've made 4 of them so far. And I should have made 2 more this year, but the virus kind of slowed things down because I do them in communities. Like this was done with the private school here in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Where the school has a grammar school, a middle school, and a high school. So the little kids, the lower grades, collected all the bottles.
Okay, cool.
And washed them and everything. Actually, the whole school collected bottles and washed them, but the little kids got to make smaller figures, like puppets, out of like maybe 12 bottles.
Okay.
And then with the older kids, I made this, and we made this in 4 days.
Wow.
Because the whole school got involved.
That's impressive.
Yeah,
it's like
you know, I like the fact that it's communal work.
Yeah.
It makes me think about when I was a kid, with my great grandfather had a farm, and we would sit around a basket and we would shell green peas. You can talk about all kinds of stuff because the work is kind of mindless, you know.
Right.
It piles up. So this is kind of the same way. It gives me a captive audience, and
right.
I can talk to them about anything, you know.
Right. And it does help to have some help, right?
Yes, it does. It does.
Does help.
Sometimes they get carried away though. Like,
oh yeah,
you see his feet. I had to make his feet over again because the kids, their feet were just like clown feet.
Oh, I see. Okay. Right.
But when you're in conversation and in the process, you know, just keep going.
So now this one is this the one that's near your driveway? Because I recall you saying something like you made one giant so big that you ran over him with your car a couple times.
Right. No, this is not that one. That's the one that came after this one.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's see the next one. I think these are okay. This is a different vibe here. This is iconic for me. This is these are your shoe constructed sculptures, which of course I think is really just taking the world by surprise. A lot of it is so again, and you have a word that you've sort of coined the phrase of upcycling rather than recycling, and you did tell me the story about the inspiration of the shoes, and it started with the tennis shoe. It didn't start with the high shoe. Is that correct?
Right. It started with the show at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do something with sneakers because I would drive through the neighborhood and see sneakers hanging off of the telephone wires. Mm-hmm. And I knew what that represented.
Yeah, that shoe flinging. They refer to it as shoe flinging.
Yeah, so I thought I would do something like that in the prison yard.
Yeah.
But I didn't have enough sneakers to make the impression I wanted to make. So I went to the thrift store. When I got there, the high heel shoe just jumped out more than the sneakers. So I made a different piece for that show.
Yeah.
I started collecting high heel shoes.
Yeah.
Now that was in the 90s, but I didn't really get into shoes heavy until 2005 when I was a fellow at the University of Georgia, and they gave me a great material budget. So I went to the local thrift store, Potter's thrift store, in September and asked them to sell me every high heel shoe they had at 50 cents a pound.
Yeah.
And they agreed to it. So by January, they gave me millions of shoes.
Yeah.
And I was really able to explore it at that point. Prior to that, I had just made maybe a couch and a chair out of shoes. But I started making these masks and flowers and all kinds of things. I had so many shoes to choose from. The one on the left is actually cast in bronze.
Yeah.
I started doing it about 4 years ago. Actually, 2012 it says. I guess I started doing it that year, maybe, casting them in bronze. Because, you know, when you think about shoes, at some point you're going to come to the idea of bronze baby shoes. So I said, why not bronze baby shoes?
Sure. That makes sense.
And also, the iron, design-wise, is not much different than the shoe. So everything I'm doing with the shoes, I learned it on the iron.
I got you.
But it's easier on the shoe.
I got you.
You know,
the conceptual nature of like looking at the shoe long enough to see the figure, that's the part that intrigues me the most, because, you know, to stare at the shoe long enough to see, for instance, like the face or the chin, the neck.
That's what it's about. That's what it's about. You know.
Yeah. So the conceptualization part is.
That's why I call it perceptual engineering.
Yeah.
You know, I have said before that when I was a kid, I would watch The Twilight Zone. No, The Outer Limits. And the announcer would say, "Please do not touch your dial. We're in control. Welcome to the outer limits."
Right.
So I feel that way, you know, like of course, we have all of our higher faculties. You know, we have imagination, intuition, memory, will, perception. So I am tweaking those.
Yeah.
And forcing you, basically taking over your perception, you know, and you can't fight it. Sometimes it takes you a long time to see it, but once you do, you'll always see it.
Well, you've done a good job. You've done an excellent job of that, because part of the connection was when you spoke of a lot of the indigenous works that were done by, you know, the African makers, and be able to look at the sculptures. And so in this case, when you think of mother and child, I mean, your whole perception of scale and depth of field where the object is concerned really kind of comes together when you're playing around with the assemblage part, like deciding that, okay, I can use the heel of the shoe for the knees and the toe of the shoes for the feet, you know, so that kind of.
And it is all play. It is all play. I never know what it's going to come out like.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, after so many years, I mean, it's been over 10 years now that I've really focused on these pieces.
Yeah.
I have a sense of what works. Like I know that all the stilettos make good teeth in a piece like for the mask there.
Yeah.
But there's always surprises. There are always things that catch me by surprise.
Right.
And I keep all this stuff in a different shoe studio.
Right.
So when I go up there, I never know what I'm going to see, but there's nothing to distract me. I'm in a room filled with shoes, and I'm playing with 2 or 3 of them. And then suddenly they look like something, and I walk around all the tables and choose another shoe. And I put them together with rubber bands so I can look at them.
Yeah.
And then I move on to a new piece.
Yeah.
And then the next day, if I like that one in the rubber bands, I will make it permanent.
Gotcha.
But I always have one in progress and one to be finished in the same night.
I got you. Yeah. So you've got these silos that you're working. You got your bottle silo, you got your shoe silo, you got your
it hasn't always been
painting silo.
It's been that way for the past 12 years, though, because you know, my whole life changed. I suddenly lived alone. I was in this house with a big family for many years, a wife and 4 kids. And I remember when we built this house during the renovation, a friend of mine came by and he said, "Man, that'd make a great studio." So now that the family's gone, it's become my studio.
Right, there you go, there you go.
And there's two things I want to point out. The first one is that it is all my work derives out of play.
Yeah.
But my sense of how to put things together is very primitive. Like the shoe pieces are like weaving.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, making necklaces. I even look at some Native American weaving patterns.
Right.
To figure out different ways to put these things together.
I can see that. So let's see what else we have, and then I think that we're kind of headed towards that time where I think we can open it up for questions. And so this is an example of kind of like the pre-assemblage. Is that correct? And then
yes.
in the photo, and then this, you know, now I'm looking at. Did you take the heels off of that? Because that could be a little uncomfortable to try to sit on. I actually started.
No, the heels are all there.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay.
But in the seat, the toes are pointing up. The toes are pointed up.
I get you. Okay.
Close to the heels.
So do you actually allow people to sit in it? Is one of those interactive pieces that got enough armature underneath that you could actually sit in?
Good, but you know, my galleries would not allow that.
Okay, I see. Sure.
But I had one in my living room for many years that I sat in.
Yeah.
And I had a couch in my studio.
Sure.
That I slept on. So.
Yeah. So these are outstanding. I've seen the ones with the high backs. I've seen, you know, and that seemed like that just really that's one of those evolutions of structure that happens.
Yeah, strange things happen. Like currently, I have a couch made out of water bottles in my studio.
Yeah. I think I saw that too.
I think maybe I'm just drawn towards furniture design, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, this is inside the shoe studio there. You can see that I actually, after I make them, I do drawings of them.
Okay.
That way, if I want to make the same piece again or a similar piece, I could know how to construct it. But they never come out the same because the shoes are always different.
Sure.
And that difference always turns it into a new piece.
So do you find the one size of a shoe better, you know, works for another? Or when you use a shoe, are you focusing on size, or is it just a piece that works better, like a woman's 9 versus a woman's 6?
Oh no, because sometimes you need a 9, sometimes you need a 6.
Right.
But most of the shoes I find are like the middle size is like size 8.
Right.
When I find a pair big enough to fit me, it's like a real treat because I wear size 13 for men.
Wow.
And a big shoe in these sculptures is a great thing, but I don't find many big ones.
Yeah. So basically, going from, you know, this now, the way that you work in scale like this becomes sort of like a maquette for your sculptures that you've done. So your bronzes.
It's true.
And so I recall you were mentioning that you do a sort of a digital transformation in order to get to go to bronze.
Yeah. Part of my residency at the Design Forum studio is at Rutgers University.
Yeah.
And they have a room of 3D scanners, so they can scan my sculptures. So now I have a file that I can print it out.
Yeah.
In any material.
Yeah, that's very cool.
We print it out in styrofoam at a different scale.
Yeah.
And then the foundry takes it from there.
Cool. So let's see what else we got, and then I think we can try and consider whether or not we got room for questions. So how are we doing, Margaret? We doing okay?
I think that's our last slide, and I think we can, we have lots of questions.
Yes, I'm
sure. We can start going through some of the questions. And there are a lot of questions, Willie, about process, but I want to start with this one because it's really beautifully written.
Okay.
Simone says, learning how to iron properly was a skill I had to learn growing up. Despite my grandmother's instructions, I scorched many linens and vividly remember the smell of scorched fabric.
Right.
I always felt ashamed of scorches, and now seeing your art, I can smile and appreciate the communicative beauty of scorches. How freeing. When in your life and how did you discover scorches as an artistic expression?
Okay. Well, listen, you know, I grew up on that line between Motown slick and hippie dirty. So somewhere along that line, I was ironing my jeans every day to get a nice crease in them.
Right.
And I always liked nice, crisp shirts. I inherited a lot of like fancy clothes from my uncle, and I maintained those clothes with a good iron. But of course, 20 years later, as an artist, I said it was kind of a spiritual thing. My studio was in a sweatshop in Newark. I received a residency at Studio Museum in Harlem. During that year, I was making garments out of sheet metal, woven sheet metal. But I didn't want to take all that metal to the studio I had in Harlem. So I was open for something to do. And I found an iron on the street, but 2 days later, I found a scorch in my studio on the floor. And that made me feel that this is meant to be, this is some power communicating something to me that I need to follow up with. Because I've been living in that studio for 10 years and never noticed a scorch on the floor. And suddenly I see a scorch on the floor. And now I'm seeing irons on the street all the time. Like the first few years, I didn't even buy irons. I found them on the street. But once they became art in demand, I started buying them at the thrift stores. But yes, I love the smell too. If you could be in my house now, you'd smell some scorching.
Yeah. That was actually another question is somebody asked, with all the scorch work, does your studio have that smell?
It has that smell today because I've been scorching for the past 2 days.
Yeah.
And I'll be scorching all day tomorrow too.
Yeah, yeah.
But yes, I love that smell. That's kind of the, it's the more senses you can touch in any experience, the better it is. So you got your sight now. I even have your sound when it's happening, but I have your nose as well, even when it's finished. So your experience is much more than just seeing a work of art, just smelling a work of art.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Other senses.
So someone else asked, how do you source your materials? You talked a little bit about a specific water bottle project, but in general, the irons, the shoes, the massive amount of water bottles you need.
Right. Well, I could kind of take them separately, like with the water bottles. Of course, I was drinking bottled water myself, but my mother lives in a building that has 20-something floors, 2 buildings side by side. So the maintenance man of her building started saving bottles for me. And every Sunday I'd go there and I'd pick up a big leaf bag, polyethylene bag, filled with bottles, 2 or 3 of them. And I did that for maybe 3 years. And then I had a couple of friends saving bottles for me also. So I actually have now a shipping container filled with bottles from top to bottom. So I don't really collect bottles anymore. But when I have a project, pre-corona anyway, the community always collected the bottles for me. So that, like in my studio at Rutgers right now, it's filled with bottles. Because I was commissioned by the landlord of the building where the studio is to make a chandelier for the lobby. And I was going to do this for my residency at Rutgers, but the virus kind of slowed that down. So I probably have like 50,000 bottles down there. Plus I got my big trailer here next to my own house filled with bottles. So that's how the bottles came about. The steam irons, as I said, for the first 3 years, and I started doing the irons in 1988, and they were primary for me up until 2000. I continued after that because I really started doing it again. But during that period of time, the first few years, I didn't actually buy any irons. I found them all on the streets of the city of Newark. And then when I would travel, if I traveled to Milwaukee or to Virginia, I would always hit the thrift stores and buy irons. And the irons have changed in design now. So the ones I like are harder to find. I'm glad I have so many of them already. I don't like those plastic ones they sell now. There's imports.
Yeah.
The 50s and 60s irons are the ones I like the best. And in terms of shoes, as I said, I went to my local thrift store and made an offer. I did it when I was in Georgia in 2005. When I came back here in 2007, I did the same thing. So in 2007, I've only had the house as a studio now for 12 years. Before that, I had a helicopter hangar, and it was like a shoe barn. It was table after table with shoes separated by color, by heel size, and you know, I had millions of them.
Great.
Because they go fast. They go
Yeah,
fast.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
a couch or a chair takes thousands of shoes to make. You know, I've made flowers that are like 6 foot in diameter, and they take like 5,000 shoes a piece. So they really go fast. I had a commission in January that required me to buy more shoes because they wanted all bright colors. So my shoe collection has even grown a lot more this year, and I hadn't bought any shoes in probably 3 years until now, until this year.
So Willie, you did a cover recently. Didn't was it Vogue that you got their attention? Did I mistake
Well,
that?
no, it's funny. It's a funny story, but I hope I got their attention. I
Yeah.
just made that cover myself.
Okay. Yeah. I thought perhaps I thought it was official because it looked like it was the real deal. I thought, okay, mate. So have you used any Prada shoes? Because I think if you do, you're gonna make some women mad because those Pradas are kind of
Oh,
expensive.
yeah, I have some Prada shoes. I have millions of shoes. I got everything, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I had an assistant in '05 who would walk through the studio and tell me the history of each shoe. She said, "This is a prom shoe. This is a wedding shoe.
Yeah.
This is a church shoe." You know, and I like that a lot. And now my current partner is a shoe person. She's got some very expensive shoes that she won't share with me, but she'll find shoes in my collection that she feels I should give her.
I get you.
And then I remember my oldest daughter got out of high school. She wanted to take a pair of shoes out of one of my chairs so she could wear it to her prom.
Yeah.
I didn't do it. I didn't do it.
Right. Right.
Here's a good question from Lee. She's asking about the connection of your work to domesticity.
Okay. Well, that's another. Like I said in the beginning, this could be like a little mini series here, but you know, the iron. These objects, they tell stories. So the iron is a domestic tool. So when I first received the iron, I made a list of everything that it made me think about. The list was based on appearance and on function and historical significance. So the appearance of the iron was a black handle. So right away, I mean, if this was math, there's a common denominator between the word black handle and black people. The common denominator is the word black. So that makes me now look at black as people, and I recognize the housekeeper, which led to the maid, which led to the slave. So then I say, now, which slave would be using an iron? So, okay, so that's going to be the house Negro, not the field Negro. So now it just blew up from there. But that's how it all started. And once I identified that as a house Negro, then it tied me to speeches by Malcolm X, which gave me a lot more stories to grow off of. And it gave me a personal awareness in that my great grandmother worked as a domestic my whole life. She died in '94. She was like 98 years old. But my whole life she worked for one family. So all those things kind of made it domestic. So the ironwork is about domestics. I imagine that based on the Malcolm X speeches, if there was a revolt on the plantation, I would ask myself, okay, so the Africans who work as slaves in the fields, their weapons are going to be those pitchforks, the shovels, those hoes, and all that stuff. But the ones who work in the house, they're going to have their irons, their iron board is going to be their shield, et cetera, et cetera. So it just kind of grew from there. A third element that added to it, because it's never one thing. This all comes like in layers.
Yeah.
The other layer is that African religion was hidden inside of Catholicism in many countries. Like you go to Brazil or to Cuba, and you think you're in a Catholic church, but you know, it's African. They declared these Christian saints as orishas in the African tradition. So they will know that these gods have different names in different religions, but they're all the same. So I said, if they're hiding African spirituality in religious icons that are Western, then how come they can't hide spirituality inside of everyday objects? So all those things kind of led to this madness.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and this is a question about the different scale that you work in. How do you balance working between a variety of scales? When you do a monumental public work, is it difficult to return to a smaller scale?
No, I don't, you know, I don't think like that. So no, for me, it's all the same. It's all the same. I mean, when it comes to drawing, the bigger the better for me, because it makes it more physical, which I like. But the concept determines the scale usually, or the space I'm working in. Like you can see behind me, I have this painting here. This painting is 9 feet by 5 feet. And I did drawings like this painting earlier in the year that were 18 by 24. But I couldn't feel them, you know. So I decided to do them as giant paintings. So now it's a whole different relationship between the artist and the product when it's bigger than you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there are many more questions. We won't have time. A lot of wonderful comments about both of you. What an interesting conversation this was. Thank you both so much. And Willie, do you want to just say, I know the reason this whole program came about is that you are planning to participate in Museum Store Sunday with the Black Art Matters. So you want to just talk a little bit about that, so people can, if they're interested, they can maybe catch you talking other places.
Well, I have to say, this is the time where I could use my special project manager, Mari, because she'll be able to tell you how to log on and all that stuff.
Yeah.
All I know is that I got to be there on Sunday myself. But I would, let's say, if you go to willie@williecole.com, tomorrow, there'll be a link that allows you to sign on. Now, I'm not sure if it's open to the public. Mm-hmm. A lot of these events are for museums only, because they're buying things in bulk. Yeah. But whatever it is, you can follow up on it at willie@williecole.com. If you go to the website and you click on store, there'll be another link that says Black Arts Matter. And you click onto that, and if we're lucky, it'll bring you right to that event on Sunday.
It's a great connection with museums, going through the stores, and that's actually how we got connected for this program. So I'm grateful to Karen at our store at the Milwaukee Art Museum for making this happen as well. So thank you both so much. And there have been so many comments in the chat and the Q&A. People really enjoyed it. So thanks again, Motope. And Willie, it was wonderful to have you. You'll have to come to Milwaukee sometime and talk about your painting, and we'd love to have you in person sometime as well.
I have to say, I just clicked on the chat button and I see right here, it says https://mam.org/event museum store Sunday.
Yeah.
That might be
the link.
Yep. That's it. That's Aaron. Aaron's on top of it always.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sir. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So we'll see. Motope, thanks again for such a great facilitation of the conversation.
Yes, nice meeting you.
It's all him. It's all Willie. You know.
All right.
It's all him.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Yes, I hope to see you all when I get to town soon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Life permits.
Yeah, that'd be great. Looking forward to it.
Yes, me
Okay.
too.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye.
Have a good night.